Welcome to Author Quick Draw. This is your permission slip to take a quick break from the hecticness of your newsfeed and hang out with me, Annie Bucknell, freelance feature writer and women's fiction author, as I get to spend some time playing Pictionary, giving away prizes and having fun with some of Australia's best loved authors. Now, we know that your favourite authors can tell incredible page-turning stories, but can they draw? We're about to find out live now in 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, everybody, and hello, Caroline Beecham.
Hi, good evening or good morning, wherever you are.
welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Guys, this is the very first time that we're streaming multiple places. So we're streaming on Facebook Live and on YouTube. So a big hello to everybody that's watching us on YouTube as well. If you can hear us loud and clear, just give us a like. And drop us a comment to say hi, tell us where you're watching from, just so that we know that everything's all working. I'm speaking to you tonight from Brisbane, and Caroline, where are we chatting to you from?
Well, we're on Sydney's Northern Beaches today, school holiday, so we've come up and we've been watching the dolphins. It's been amazing today, and there's some whales out there. So hopefully this week.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds so beautiful. We've got really nice springtime weather out here too in Queensland. So been enjoying some lovely sunny days. So how this works is we're going to chat to Caroline about her latest novel, Finding Eadie, find out a little bit more about her and the story behind the story. While we're chatting to her, she's going to actually draw her favourite movie. And at the end of that little chat, she's going to hold up the picture and we're all going to guess what she's drawn and what movie what her favorite movie might be. And the first person to correctly guess is going to win a copy of this book. And guys, you are going to want to win a copy of this book. Caroline Beecham, this is her third novel. And she just writes these beautiful, emotional World War II historical fiction dramas that are just, I just really loved how they really take some little known history. So Caroline, this book, as I said in the intro before, I could not put it down. I started with the prologue, which was just so gripping. And then as a new mum, this actually does cover some topics like baby farming, illegal adoptions, which were all still happening in World War II, which absolutely blew my mind. And also the publishing industry in London. So it was just, I learnt so much, but I just did not feel like I was learning. I was just devouring the story and I needed to know what would happen to Alice and Eadie at the end. So thank you so much for writing such a fantastic book.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's kind of like, wonderful to hear when someone finds something they can't put it down. So creating, there's lots of good stories out there. I don't know how many are sort of untold stories. That's obviously what interests me, but if you create characters that people sort of obviously want to go on the journey with, then brilliant. And if it's compelling, but I think with Eadie's story, it started with a personal story, in that my grandmother told me that someone in our family had an illegal child during wartime, and that the mother had sold the baby to a childless couple in the nearby town. And I was obviously pretty shocked about that and surprised, and sort of didn't do anything about it for a while before sort of, you start asking questions. And I think this is where probably a lot of writers come from with their material, certainly where I come from, is that if you have a story or just an idea that keeps going around in your head and you're thinking, why, how, and there's just all these questions, then you know that you need to find some answers. And it actually was really not uncommon at the time to have these illegal adoptions, and that's what I found out during research, that there was, in various ways, a lot of it taking place because women didn't really have any alternatives.
Yeah, and being an unwed mother was such a stigma back then as well. It wasn't something that was easily accepted. And even though Alice is happy to accept her situation and make the most of it, she really finds herself in a very precarious situation, not from her own doing. So when you were researching, in the book, there's lots of different terms thrown around. Really, it is just a legal adoption. So it's a would you define it as an adoption where money is exchanged for a baby and it's outside of the law and the proper channels. Is that what you would say, you know, baby farming would be in the context of the novel?
Well, illegal adoptions took like many forms. The practice of baby farming was something that had been going on for a long time, and that's where people took a child in for a small sum or whatever sum of money under the pretext of looking after it, and they in fact didn't. They didn't look after it at all, and that's what happened in the novel. Illegal adoptions took place in various forms, and the reason that happened is that there was meant to be an Adoption Act that was meant to be passed in 1939, but because of war, the outbreak of war wasn't passed. It was put on hold, and so that's where Olive Melville Brown, who was the journalist that worked for the Daily Mail, came in, and there were lots of other female pioneers that worked for different charities that actually really pushed for that law to be passed. And that's, I mean, I don't want to kind of, no spoilers, but that's why Alice's book is so important and her work that she does, because she wants to, you know, as well as kind of combining what she's doing, looking for her child, but she wants to try and make people aware of what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't believe that there were actually, back in that time, there were adverts in places like the Daily Mail for babies, for people to adopt babies, for babies, you know, for the baby farming and those activities. That was really surprising to me. I'm guessing through your research that you would have done a great deal of research on this particular novel, and that you would have read a lot of those sort of, in fact, you say at the back of the novel, you read a lot of news articles, and some of the articles that are mentioned in here are real life articles.
Yeah, I've included some of the research because it was pretty shocking. I mean, a lot of the details are sort of quite harrowing. So there's one newspaper article in particular, but the rest, the research, you know, it obviously sort of feeds in. There's quite a lot that I do beforehand just to kind of understand the world that the character's living in. But it was quite difficult because it's obviously quite bleak in one sense. And Alice goes on quite a difficult emotional journey, and I consulted, you know, midwives, doctors to know what kind of physical and emotional state she'd be in. But how I balanced out that kind of dark, kind of serious, really, really, you know, quite traumatic kind of experience with making this actually a book that people would want to read as well. And I think that that's where, you know, London Zoo and you know, the relationships and the friendships and that becomes so important.
And there were such great quality secondary characters in the novel as well that were propelling it, as you said, adding to some of the lightness. It was set in the scenes of the London publishing industry during war times, which, as we might know or suspect, they were subject to rations. But really, you take us into that publishing house and we get to see life inside that publishing house, you know, when they're all competing for paper, for the ability to actually print these books. And the decision to publish an author was just such a difficult one, because, you know, you had to try and predict what was actually going to sell in the most unpredictable of circumstances. So what was it, you know, that made you want to tell the story of reading or publishing in wartime?
Just finding out how important books were to people then. It was kind of complete coincidence that the book was obviously published this year, when we've realised during lockdown how important reading is for us. But it was more than ever then, because people needed distraction, they needed information, they needed kind of escapism, and really there wasn't a huge amount to do, you know, when you were in a shelter or when you were at home during blackout, and they obviously didn't have the entertainment we have now. No Xbox, no Netflix. So, you know, it was really important, and also for the troops, because they're away, you know, fighting, etc. But there's also a lot of downtime, a lot of traveling, and it was during those periods that there was a lot of reading, and it was just fascinating sort of discovering that they made special books for the troops, and that they had sort of double printing, double columns on one page, so that they, you know, someone else could look over their shoulder. You know, a friend could sit by them and read at the same time they were. and there were different schemes in different countries that supported the troops, and there were different subscription libraries. Like in the UK, there were like WH Smith, Boots. There was just like a whole load of information that you could have included, but obviously you had to stop.
But the things that you did include were so fascinating and really drove the story as well. So, you know, even just the bombing of the publishing houses in London, like as a reader, you're just reading that going, how devastating. And really, we don't often think about, there's so much variety available to us as readers at the moment, and in these times. You know, you can find a book, there's a book there for anybody, for any taste, and we're able to just consume them in high volumes and high amounts without even needing to reread things. But it really took me back to a place in time where, you know, you did reread a lot of books and there just wasn't the glut of fiction available that there is now. Not that I'd want to go back to that, because I do quite like my variety and being able to get lots of stories, but it's almost like that was the birthplace of when our voracious need to kind of read and have that variety and that interest kind of came in.
Well, during the 30s is when they started publishing the Penguin books, and that's, before that they were all hardbacks and it was like a big investment, and so it made reading affordable for people. That was the whole idea behind it, is that you could go to a newsstand and you could pick up a paperback and then you could read it. And I think that was one of the things that the Americans cottoned on to afterwards, and it's included a bit in the storyline with the New York office. You make these books available to people now, and then when they come back from the war, not like an American to miss out on, you know, the commercial angle. You're going to have this whole kind of generation of readers. So that was kind of behind the thinking of my US company boss.
Yeah, absolutely. And even now, as you said, like in lockdown, you know, a lot of people have rediscovered their love of reading, which is wonderful. But, you know, people have been consuming Netflix and they've been consuming Xbox games and all those sorts of things. But so many of those stories that we love actually have their origins in books anyway. So there's just so many that, like, you know, books may have transformed, but the stories themselves seem no less important. So it was a really good kind of way to sort of view that trajectory of the publishing world.
Yeah, it's it. I mean, it's a really interesting world. So
yeah, it certainly is. One of the other things that I found with your novels, so this is your third book, and you have a reputation for really writing characters, and especially female heroines, and the female heroines who, you know, are showing everyday courage in wartime, and really taking those stories that we may not actually see a lot of representation of. Like, we do see a lot of representation of male heroism in wartime, but what you do is you kind of take these situations like, you know, artists, we've got a publisher, you know, we've got someone working in you know, the kitchen and feeding people in the Ministry of Food. You take these stories of people that really were showing courage and bravery, going about their daily lives and you know, and living through the war. Why, you know, what is it that draws you to writing about these female driven stories?
It's untold stories. It's finding a story that hasn't been told, and because there's more, I suppose that it's a lot of this history is told from the male perspective, or it's about sort of the mechanics of war. So what was going on behind the scenes, what was going on sort of on the domestic front, or it wasn't the domestic front, it was essentially the jobs at home that the women were actually filling. A lot of that, you know, hadn't been written about. So with the restaurants, I just thought it was really fascinating and kind of a bit of a challenge, really, to find that story, because they really did set up these British restaurants to feed people because of the shortages, and just knowing how important it was. But also with food, it kind of really brings people together. It's restorative, but it's also you know, it's the most basic need as well. So that was kind of like the genesis of Maggie's Kitchen, and then Finding Eadie really was because it just kind of really annoyed me. that there was this special war artists committee that was set up by the government, and there were 38 male war artists, and there was only one woman, and and they weren't allowed to go overseas and record the war the same as the male war artists were, and it just kind of it sparked something, and again it was going to the archives and finding all the material which was there, which was just incredible, and these little booklets that were published, and again, I mean, there's so many threads to it, because the art captures what was happening at the time, and it's just a really, really interesting area. So, and I suppose the same again with Finding Eadie, with again women's roles during wartime.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're originally a writer-producer from Brighton, UK yourself. So do you do a lot in terms of research trips back home? Like you mentioned, going to archives. I'm imagining you going all through these places that we're reading about in these books.
I have in the past. I mean, I came out here 20 years ago, so I grew up in London. I mean, I grew up in Brighton, but lived in London for a while. And obviously, going back and visiting family, I would always kind of do a research trip as well, and it was fantastic. It's a bit more of a challenge now.
Yeah.
It's a bit worrying, actually. I was sort of working on my new novel and kind of how I'm actually gonna do that. But we have to work with the resources we've got, online archives. But it is really important to actually go and do the physical research and see the settings. We write through our senses, we use our 5 senses. So that is important. So it's like how you can recreate that. So, watching videos, going on YouTube. I mean, I've been watching old black and white movies from Vienna. Well, not movies, but really rare archive for my new project. And you just have to get by doing just finding some left of field things, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of like the lessons from these books, these heroines, they just have to keep adapting. And I think that when you chat to authors at this point, a lot of them have launched books during coronavirus or writing projects, like you said, that require a lot of physical research that they just can't do, and people are having to get pretty creative on how they're going to do that. But I have no doubt that the next book that you're working on will be just as fabulous. Are you able to share a little bit about that yet?
Not too much. It is historical fiction, but unlike the other books, the character, who I'm writing about, she's a real character, and she left an incredible legacy. And I came across her a couple of years ago, and have just really surprised that nothing's been written about her. So she is a really great subject to write about. And so her life is going to be fictionalized. One piece of kind of good news is that it feels like a huge responsibility writing about somebody who has actually existed. Whereas my characters were created before, but somebody is actually working on a biography of her, which is great because she deserves one. But it takes kind of the weight off my shoulders, because it's like, okay, I'm writing fiction. I don't have to, I don't have to carry that kind of mantle. So that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that, as the fiction author, we'll be looking to you to breathe life and feeling into the character, whereas the biographies, they often stick to the facts. There's often a lot of emotion in them, but it's just not quite the same as picking up historical fiction and reading that. I often find it actually leads me to reading biographies. If I read a historical fiction piece I really love, then I'll go and do extra research, but it's usually my introduction to a person. So I'm really excited to find out who it is that you'll be working on soon. We just got a question in the comments from Nola Marie Hartridge. She wants to know if you only write historical fiction.
There was a contemporary storyline in Eleanor's Secret. It's whatever the story needs. There'll probably be a parallel storyline in my new novel as well. But it's really how the story is going to work best, how you can tell your character story best. I mean, I'd like to probably write a whole novel, which is not historical fiction one day, but the story is the important thing, or the character.
And that's probably what you're drawn to as well, you know, like as you said, you'll do the research and then something will kind of zing inside you and you'll know that there's a thread there for you to follow through that could lead to a whole book. With the books that you do write, you're drawn to the World War II stories and those wartime stories. Are there other periods that call to you that you think maybe one day you'll explore, or is this the area that you're just passionate about and that you want to keep going with?
It's not the era, it's the story. It's the person. It's interesting though, the sort of the first third of the new novel is set in early, like 35 to 38, which is really the lead up to the Second World War. And I'm really pleased in a way because there's always that why, and not understanding how things happened. I mean, we're all really aware of sort of the big picture stuff, but the kind of, you still can't understand how it happened. So for me now, my research is kind of finding out about what happened in the lead up and the catalyst to all these events. And so it's kind of interesting because it's earlier than I have worked before. But I don't think there's any specific time period. And it's interesting because I've got into watching Outlander in lockdown. That jumps all over the place.
It does.
Oh, okay, here we are. And then I don't think I could go. I don't know. I feel like I have to relate to the period in some way, and I don't know if it was too distant. I don't know if I could relate to it, but you never know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Outlander. I quite enjoyed the books and the TV series, but yes, it does jump around quite a bit and goes quite far back in time. But that is it's just a whole. When you write historical fiction or you watch historical fiction shows or dramas, there's just so much that you can cover. I mean, you can go right back to Bernard Cornwell and all those things, right up to the future, or not to the future, to the most recent past. But what I love about these stories, and a question that Nola's asked in the comments as well, is these sorts of stories that are set in the most recent war, in World War II, they often give us an idea of how our grandparents, our great grandparents would have lived, and it's that connection. Even though it seems so far removed, it's really, really not. Do you speak to elderly people about their experiences as you write some of this?
Well, my grandparents were both in the war. My nan was in the Land Army and she died last year, but she told me a lot of things about what used to happen. And I mean, particularly for Maggie's Kitchen, how they used to use beetroot for lipstick, and they used to draw pencil down the back of their legs and brown their legs with Bisto to make them look tanned, and all these kind of. But also, on a broader range, there was information. But recently, I had a letter from a 90-year-old in Canberra, and he said that his family name was similar to a name in Eleanor's Secret, and he'd read the book, and then he'd gone and found the book and how much he enjoyed. And I've been writing to him, and he's seen a book of poetry that he got published. So I'm going to ask him if he'll let me publish one of his poems on my website, because it's just great. And he's, and he said, I remember this, and you get letters from people, which is fantastic. And I mean, the best research you can do is talking to people. I mean, I talked to a chef, interviewed a chef when I was writing Maggie's Kitchen, because just, I think it's like being a method actor. You have to know the processes and how people sort of feel, and, the kind of touch, and, coming back to the senses again.
Yeah, and a lot of the writers that we have on, very much engage in that kind of physical method acting research as well. So yeah, absolutely. How are you going with your drawing?
Oh, I haven't started it yet.
I've distracted you too well. That's all right.
How have I got? Speed. Bit of
That's all right.
drawing.
You know what? The more stick figurey, the better usually, the better we can understand it. So while you're doing that, we might actually go to some, questions from our author community, because we love the writing community. They're always want to know the tricks of the trade. So I was in the research that we were doing, came up that you were a student of Curtis Brown Creative, which is a really popular school in London. Curtis Brown is a very popular agency, and you had done the Write Your Novel program, I believe. I'm just wondering what you'd say to others that are considering a course either with Curtis Brown Creative or with something somewhere like that. Was that something you'd recommend?
Oh, definitely, because one of the main things is that you get to workshop your work. And I think ultimately, unless you're going to write for yourself, which one student did, because she got quite, she didn't really like the feedback. It is an issue that you have to be comfortable. You have to be comfortable receiving feedback and also giving feedback to people. So unless you've made that decision, you're writing for yourself, which is absolutely fine. It teaches you that you have to do that because you're writing, hopefully, for a readership. But it's, the professionals, the writers that take you on these courses have incredible experience, novels, contacts. You also stay as part of an alumni, which is really valuable. So yeah, no, definitely. And it gives you the structure as well, especially I was like you when I started writing Maggie's Kitchen. The kids were both at home, they hadn't started school yet. So to just have your structure in your day and keep it separate from whatever else is going on is really good. And then, of course, you have to treat it like a 9-to-5 job. You have to treat it like a full-time job. Otherwise, I don't think you'd get the words. You wouldn't get the words on the page. I don't think you'd finish the manuscript.
Yeah, very much is about thinking about it like a business, isn't it? With your Curtis Brown Creative course, did you find that, you really trusted that feedback because you knew just the reputation of the agency and the credentials of the people that were working there?
Yes, they had guest tutors, and then Anna Davis, who actually was the school. She runs the school and the program. She's incredibly, interested and personal, and you can drop her sort of emails yourself. So they're very invested in all the students. They've had a lot of success with their students, but also if anybody in Australia wants to do a course based here, then Faber Academy is incredible as well, which is run out of Allen and Unwin.
Okay.
I don't know if you're aware of that one too.
No, I wasn't familiar with that one. Well, we might, after the show, I'll drop a link in the comments.
Yeah, and they also do non-fiction and biography if anyone wants to concentrate on a different kind of genre.
That's fantastic. And the great thing, there's not many great things about the situation we're in, but one of them is that a lot of this stuff is now online. So it's never been a better time to go and explore these options if you are interested in writing. Caroline, just one other writing related question. So with the research that you do, these novels are obviously fairly research intensive. Would you find that you would do all your research up front and then start writing, or do you do a chunk of it and then you kind of know when you're good to go and keep threading things through? What's your process there?
There has to definitely be quite intense research at the beginning, just to show that you have got a viable idea, really. And also, if there's enough that you get these little trails that you want to follow, then it kind of piques your interest, because I think you have to be a detective as well. You have to be really curious, because it's just a whole load of unanswered questions. It's like the why and the how. So if your research kind of gives you more, know that that's something that you want to write about. But if kind of you find you're coming up a bit against a wall, then probably, you need to change direction. But it's important, I think. People have told me as well, don't do too much research because you can just go down rabbit holes. But you'll know, like, instinctively if something's important, whether it's important for your story or for your character. I went to Sydney Writers' Festival a couple of years ago when Jennifer Egan was talking, and she was amazing. And what she said, which really, which I felt, but I hadn't kind of really verbalized in the same way, is that you have to do enough research until you form a second memory bank for your character. Well, no, you form a second memory bank for yourself, which is kind of the world that the character inhabits. Because at that stage, they just kind of act independently. And I thought, yes, that's what happens. Because when you're writing and it's not working, or you feel like you're forcing it and it doesn't feel like the character would actually do that you're making them do it. But if you've done enough research and if you've done enough character development, then it kind of flows a lot better. You're nodding, Annie, so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. Yeah, I'm thinking of some earlier drafts that I've been working through, and yeah, it is. There's a tipping point, isn't it, where the character starts to animate themselves. And when you just said, when you're making them do it versus when they're doing it, yeah, totally relate to that. So that's a very good point. Have you finished your drawing yet? Or do you need some more?
I have.
Because we do have.
I don't think anyone's going to get it, but there you go. No one's going to know.
Okay, hold it right up to the screen. And then just slowly pan it across is usually the best way. Okay. Can you lift it up a little bit higher? Oh.
There we are. Can you see that better?
Yeah. Okay. Oh. All right. We're going to have a bit of a delay, so it'll be a little bit before comments and the guesses start coming in. Okay, so I'm seeing a movie theatre.
Yeah. Could we do a charades? Can we do like a, 2 words?
Okay, if you can tell me the categories, like a comedy, a drama.
Oh, it's drama.
It's a drama, okay. And what era? When was it made, roughly?
It's non-English language, if that helps.
Non-English language.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a tough one. Okay.
All right. I thought maybe I should have picked an easier one, but it is my favourite movie. So
this is truly your favourite film. All right. Yeah. Sorry. What language?
It would be lying if I kind of did something else.
Okay. We do have a guess. Is it Cinema Paradiso?
Yay!
Melissa, well done. That's fantastic.
Oh, I'm glad someone got it.
Well, there you go. There's another fan. What is the movie about? Tell me a little about it. I might need to add it to my list. Oh,
it's an Italian film. It's just lovely.
Oh.
It's just a beautiful film. And it's an Italian, and it has an amazing score. It's Ennio Morricone is the composer, and it's just beautiful music.
Oh, that sounds like a lovely Sunday afternoon watch for me. So I'll add that to my list. Thank you, Caroline. I've got a new movie to watch now. That is all we've got time for tonight. So I really appreciate your time this evening. If people want to keep up to date with your latest novels and, this next one, the historical fiction based on the real person, where would be the best place for them to kind of find your work?
Well, I've got a website, carolinebeecham.com. But I'm also on Facebook and Insta and Twitter, and I've even got a YouTube channel. So there you go. You just have too much me.
So basically, wherever they are, you'll be there.
Wherever everyone's comfortable, whatever kind of world you inhabit, then whatever is going on, there's different events or giveaways. Then I usually put it across all channels. So.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight. Guys, next week we're joined by Sandy Docker. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you. It's about time for that cup now, don't you think? Thank you so much for joining me tonight, guys. I hope you had as much nerdy fun as I did chatting to some of our absolute favourite best-selling authors. You will never believe the people I have lined up for us in the next couple of weeks. So to make sure that you don't miss out on any of the fun or really any of the giveaways, be sure that you've liked and subscribed to my YouTube channel, Annie Bucknell, or like me on Facebook where we go live at 7:30 every Thursday night. You can also find me on Instagram at annie.bucknell where I share more of my daily life and my daily battle trying to write a novel and file freelance feature articles with a toddler in tow. It's good fun. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.